In the heart of 16th century Mexico, after the fall of the mighty Aztec Empire and the rise of ruthless Spanish colonial rule, a new fire of resistance was rising, one that would echo across the highlands of Nueva Galicia. His name was Francisco Tenamaxtli, known also as Tenamaxtli. He was no ordinary rebel. He was a war chief, a strategist, a spiritual leader, and eventually a man who dared to stand face to face with the King of Spain himself and speak truth to imperial power. His life is not just a story of resistance, it's a story of survival, dignity, and defiance in the shadow of empire. Tenamaxtli was born in Nochistlán, a town in what is now the state of Zacatecas, Mexico. He came from the Caxcan people, a proud and resilient indigenous group descended from Chichimeca ancestry. These were mountain people, familiar with the land, its secrets, and its power. The Spanish had begun to claw their way northward after defeating the Aztecs in 1521. Hoping to extract silver and force conversion to Catholicism across all of Mesoamerica. But the lands of northern Mexico, especially Zacatecas and Jalisco, were not easily subdued. Unlike the centralized Aztec Empire, these regions were defended by dozens of decentralized indigenous nations that relied on guerrilla tactics, fortified strongholds, and deep ancestral ties to the land. By the late 1530s, tensions in Nueva Galicia had reached a boiling point. Spanish encomenderos, colonial lords, were brutalizing local populations through forced labor, excessive tribute demands, and spiritual violence. Missionaries imposed foreign gods. Soldiers punished resistance with death. Entire villages were uprooted and enslaved, yet the people did not remain silent. In 1540, those tensions exploded into a full-scale indigenous uprising known as the Mixtón War. It was one of the most significant rebellions against Spanish rule in the early colonial period, and Tenamaxtli was at the heart of it. With the Spanish preoccupied by silver extraction and missionary expansion, Tenamaxtli took the opportunity to unite various indigenous groups in revolt. The Caxcanes, Zacatecos, Tepehuanis, and others came together under his leadership. He quickly proved himself not just as a fierce warrior, but also as a masterful strategist. His forces established fortified hilltop positions across the rugged Mixtón mountain range and launched coordinated attacks on Spanish settlements. Churches were burned. Colonial officials were captured. Roads were made impassable. The Spanish were stunned. The Spanish governor, Cristobal de Oñate, was the first to respond. But his forces were outmatched. Tenamaxtli's warriors knew the terrain intimately, striking with speed and then vanishing into the hills. Governor Oñate was forced to call for reinforcements from Mexico City. The Viceroy of New Spain, Antonio de Mendoza, took the rebellion as a direct challenge to his authority. He responded by assembling a massive force of up to 30,000 men, Spanish soldiers, indigenous allies loyal to the crown, cavalry units, and artillery. This was no minor skirmish. It was a full-on war, and Tenamaxtli stood at the head of one of the most impressive indigenous resistance movements in early colonial history. The centerpiece of Tenamaxtli's defense was the hilltop fortress of Mixtón. From this stronghold, surrounded by steep cliffs and natural defenses, his people mounted a heroic defense. The Spanish laid siege. Cannon fire rained down. Waves of soldiers attempted to scale the heights. But Tenamaxtli's fighters repelled them again and again, using rocks, arrows, fire, and sharpened stakes. For months, the fortress held strong. It became a symbol of defiance, not only to the local population but also to indigenous nations watching from afar. If Mixtón could stand, so could they. Eventually, through overwhelming numbers and betrayal by some of their allies, the Spanish broke through. The fortress fell. Thousands were killed. Survivors were enslaved or executed. But Tenamaxtli did not die at Mixtón. He escaped, and for the next several years, he led a campaign of guerrilla warfare against the Spanish throughout the region. He refused to be captured. He refused to give up. But Tenamaxtli's most daring act wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the courtroom. In an astonishing move, Tenamaxtli decided to take his fight directly to the Spanish crown. He traveled to Spain, not as a prisoner but by his own volition, determined to plead the case of his people before the highest authority in the empire. He crossed the Atlantic Ocean and appeared in the royal court of Valladolid sometime around 1555. Imagine the scene. A Chichimeca war leader standing in the heart of the Spanish Empire, thousands of miles from home, addressing the very king whose name had been used to justify his people's oppression. Tenamaxtli argued that the Mixtón War had been a defensive response to violence and abuse. He exposed the corruption of colonial officials, the horrors of the encomienda system, and the lies used to mask exploitation as conversion. He demanded justice, not only for himself but for the countless indigenous people who had been murdered, enslaved, and erased. His testimony was powerful, eloquent, and bold. And he didn't beg. He challenged. He used the Spanish legal system against itself, forcing the empire to reckon with its own laws. He was joined by sympathetic priests and lawyers who believed in the reformist ideals of Bartolomé de las Casas, and others who spoke against indigenous abuse. Tenamaxtli became a symbol of legal resistance, showing that the colonized were not simply passive victims. They were thinkers, leaders, and fighters who would not be silenced. His case became part of the larger debates happening within the Spanish Empire about how to govern the New World and whether indigenous peoples had the same rights as Spaniards under natural and divine law. Though the final verdict of his case remains lost to history, the mere fact that it happened was revolutionary. His presence in Spain altered perceptions. It shook the moral conscience of many within the empire. Tenamaxtli had turned the tools of empire against itself, using the law, diplomacy, and reason alongside the memory of his military resistance. After his case in Spain, records of Tenamaxtli vanish. Some believe he died there. Others say he returned to New Spain and continued his work in secret. Whatever the truth, his legacy endured. He inspired future generations of indigenous leaders. He laid the foundation for later uprisings. His name remained etched into the cultural memory of the region as a warrior who fought not only with weapons, but with words. Tenamaxtli's story reminds us that resistance can take many forms. Sometimes it's a burning arrow loosed from a mountain fortress. Sometimes it's a petition signed in a foreign court. Sometimes it is a warrior to silence in exile that speaks louder than any shout on the battlefield. He was a man who fought across two worlds, on the hills of Mixtón and in the chambers of Valladolid, and refused to surrender in either. Today, statues of conquistadors still line the plazas of many Mexican cities, but the memory of Tenamaxtli is rising again. His name is being reclaimed by communities who understand that the story of Latin America is not just one of conquest, but of unrelenting resistance. His life is proof that even in the darkest hours of colonization, there were men and women who refused to be broken. Francisco Tenamaxtli was not just a war chief. He was a voice of justice, a defender of dignity, and a reminder that history belongs not to those who conquer, but to those who endure. Follow for more history they never taught us in school.